They say a man's worth is measured by what he leaves behind. But on the night my son stood in front of me and said, "You're useless now, Dad. Hand me the house." I realized my worth was about to be tested in the cruelest way. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply smiled, because I already had a plan that would turn his greed into the very chain around his neck. He thought he was taking over my home. What he didn't know was that, within days, he'd be paying me rent just to live under the same roof, and that was only the beginning. Before I reveal how everything unfolded, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated or called useless by someone you love? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next twist in this story. Tell me where you're watching from, whether it's New York, Dallas, Toronto, or anywhere else, because this is a story that touches every family. Now, let me take you back to the night it all began. That night, I learned how cruel silence could be. My son, my only son, stood in the middle of the living room with his arms crossed, eyes hard, jaw set. The air between us was heavy, almost suffocating. He wasn't here to talk, not really. He was here to demand. "Dad, you're useless now. Just sign the house over to me." The words sliced through me like a blade. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My ears rang, my chest tightened, and the room spun as if the very walls recoiled from what he had just said. Useless. It wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict, a declaration that everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, meant nothing. I sat there in my old recliner, gripping the armrest so tightly that my fingers ached. I stared at him, trying to find even a flicker of the boy I had raised, the boy who used to run through these halls with scraped knees and laughter that filled the rooms. But all I saw was a man hardened by arrogance, blinded by greed. "Dad," he pressed, his voice sharp, "this place is too much for you. You don't need it anymore. You're wasting space. Just sign it over and let me take care of it. Take care of it." The irony stung. He wasn't offering to take care of me. He wanted the house, the deed, the power. I looked around the room, my gaze falling on the walls lined with photographs. There was one of him at age 6, missing his front teeth, holding a baseball bat too big for his hands. Another of him and his mother at Christmas, her arms wrapped around him while I stood behind the camera. Each picture was a memory etched into the bones of this house. And now my son was asking me to erase it all with the stroke of a pen. I couldn't speak. My throat burned with words I couldn't force out. He mistook my silence for weakness. "You don't even use half the rooms, Dad? You can't maintain it. Stop clinging to the past, clinging to the past." The past was all I had left. My wife was gone, taken too soon. My body wasn't as strong as it once was. The world outside moved faster than I could keep up with. But this house was my anchor. It held the echoes of laughter, the warmth of family dinners, the whispers of love that lingered long after my wife's voice had faded. And he wanted me to hand it over like it was nothing. Memories flooded back, unbidden and relentless. I saw myself as a young man, sweaty and exhausted after 14-hour shifts at the steel factory. My hands raw, my back screaming in pain, but my heart swelling with pride when I walked through the door of this very house. It hadn't been much back then, just a modest home with peeling paint and creaky stairs. But it was ours. I remembered the nights I came home late, my wife already asleep, my son curled in bed. I would sneak into his room, kiss his forehead, and whisper promises into the dark. "I'll give you a better life, son. I'll give you everything I never had." I remembered skipping meals so there would be enough food on the table, working double shifts so the mortgage could be paid, missing birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays because the factory needed me, because the bills needed me, because my family needed me. And now that same boy, the one I had carried on my shoulders at the county fair, the one I had cheered for at every Little League game, the one I had held through fevers and heartbreaks, looked at me and saw nothing but useless. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. He sighed, shaking his head like I was a stubborn child. Just think about it. Don't drag this out. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The echo lingered long after he was gone. I sat there in the dark, the house suddenly too big, too empty. My chest ached, not just from the sting of his words, but from the weight of all the years I had poured into raising him. Had I done something wrong? Had I failed him somehow? Or was this what love had come to? Being cast aside once you'd given all you had to give. I stood slowly, my legs stiff, and wandered through the house like a ghost. My fingers trailed along the walls, brushing against the photographs, the dents in the wood, the stains on the carpet. Each mark was a story. Each imperfection was a memory. In the kitchen, I paused by the dining table. I saw flashes of the past. My wife setting down steaming plates of food. My son chattering excitedly about school. The sound of laughter filling the room. I blinked and it was gone, replaced by silence and shadows. I poured myself a glass of water, staring at the ripples as though they could steady the storm inside me. My reflection stared back, lined face, tired eyes, thinning hair. Yes, I was old. Yes, I was worn, but useless? No, that word did not belong to me. I thought of my wife again, her voice like a whisper in my ear. A house is more than walls, John. It's a legacy. Don't let anyone take it from you. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could almost feel her hand on mine, warm and steady. She would not want me to surrender. She would not want me to bow to arrogance. The clock ticked past midnight. I remained at the table, the house silent around me, my mind replaying my son's words over and over. Each repetition hurt, but it also hardened something inside me. It wasn't rage that grew in me, not the kind that makes you shout or break things. It was something colder, stronger, the kind of resolve forged in years of sacrifice, the kind of strength that doesn't shout but waits, watches, plans. My son thought the word useless was the end of my story. He didn't realize it was the beginning of his lesson, and as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I whispered into the silence, not to him, but to myself. You'll see, son. You'll see I'm far from useless. The morning after my son's cruel words, the house felt colder than it had in years. The walls seemed thinner, the floorboards creaked louder, and even the familiar smell of coffee brewing in the pot seemed to carry no comfort. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my mug, hands trembling around the chipped ceramic handle. Useless. The word hadn't left me since last night. It followed me like a shadow, whispering in every corner of the house. I heard it in the ticking of the clock, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the groan of the pipes. It wasn't just a word anymore. It had become a sentence, a weight pressing down on my chest. For a long while, I thought of doing nothing. Maybe that was what he expected. Maybe he thought I would fold, too tired to fight, too old to resist. He thought I would hand him the deed like passing a baton in a race I no longer had the strength to finish. But he underestimated me. I didn't sleep that night. I wandered from room to room, touching the walls as though grounding myself in the memories carved into them. The house had been my battlefield and my sanctuary for decades. Every nail, every floorboard, every crack in the ceiling had a story. I had bled for this place, and no one, not even my own son, was going to strip me of it. By morning, I made my decision. I pulled on my old coat, the one with the frayed cuffs and worn collar, and stepped outside. The autumn air hit me with a sharp bite, but I welcomed it. It cleared my head, steadied my breath. My boots crunched against the gravel as I walked to the bus stop. I wasn't headed to work. I was headed to fight. The law office sat in a glass building downtown, surrounded by the rush of people who seemed too busy to notice an old man shuffling inside. I felt small in the lobby, out of place among the polished shoes and pressed suits. The receptionist glanced at me briefly before forcing a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "Yes," I croaked, my voice rough. "With Mr. Harris." I had known Harris for years, though not closely. He had once handled the closing papers when I refinanced the house, back when my wife was still alive. He was younger than me by a good 20 years, sharp-eyed and quick with words. When I stepped into his office, he rose from behind his mahogany desk and extended a hand. "John," he said warmly, "it's been too long. What brings you in today?" I hesitated, the shame burning hot in my chest. How could I admit that my own flesh and blood had looked me in the eye and called me useless? That he had demanded I sign over the only thing of value I had left? The words tangled in my throat. Finally, I sat down and forced them out. "My son, he wants the house." Harris frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Wants it? How? He says I don't need it anymore. Says I'm old. My voice cracked. He called me useless. Told me to just sign it over." The silence that followed was deafening. Harris tapped a pen against his desk, his eyes narrowing. "And what do you want to do, John?" I looked down at my hands, the calluses, the veins, the years of labor written into my skin. "I don't want to give it to him, but I don't want to throw him out either. He's my son." Harris nodded slowly. "Blood is complicated. But remember this, you're not powerless. You hold the deed. As long as your name is on it, you decide what happens to that house." Something flickered in my chest, faint but alive. Power. I hadn't felt that in a long time. Harris leaned forward, lowering his voice. "If he wants to live there, make him live there on your terms. Draft a lease. Put it in writing. Make him your tenant. Legally, he'll have no choice but to pay rent. You'll remain the owner, and he'll be nothing more than a renter." The words struck me like a spark to dry kindling. My son thought he had cornered me, but Harris had just opened a door I didn't know existed. "A tenant?" I repeated. Harris nodded. "Yes. You'd be his landlord. It's perfectly legal, perfectly enforceable. If he refuses to pay, you can evict him. But more importantly, it makes one thing crystal clear. You are not useless. You hold the power, not him." I sat back, the idea swirling in my mind. Landlord, me, at my age, to my own son? The thought was almost absurd, and yet the more I considered it, the more it made sense. If he wanted to treat me like I was nothing, then he would learn the price of that mistake. "Do it," I said finally, my voice firm. "Draw up the papers." That afternoon, Harris spread the documents across his desk. Legal language swam before my eyes, but Harris explained every line, every clause. My son would sign as the tenant. I would remain the owner, the landlord. The rent would be modest. I didn't want to bleed him dry, but symbolic, enough to remind him every month exactly where he stood. When Harris slid the pen across the desk, my hand trembled as I picked it up. It wasn't weakness this time. It was the weight of what I was about to do. I thought of my wife again, her gentle voice telling me not to let anyone erase our legacy. I thought of the long nights I'd spent working to hold this house together. I thought of my son, standing in my living room, his eyes filled with arrogance. The pen touched the paper, and I signed. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The shame that had clung to me since last night began to lift. The word useless no longer fit. I wasn't useless. I was a landlord. I was in control. Harris gathered the papers with a satisfied nod. "It's done. Now the choice is his. He can accept the terms or he can leave. But either way, John, you win." I left the office with the documents tucked safely into my briefcase. The city buzzed around me, horns honking, people rushing past. For the first time in a long time, I walked tall. My shoulders straightened, my chest lifted. The autumn wind bit at my cheeks, but it didn't sting. It refreshed me. When I arrived home, I placed the papers on the kitchen table and stared at them. The house felt different now, stronger, safer, as if it, too, understood what I had just done. I poured myself a glass of water, raised it like a silent toast, and whispered into the empty room, "To respect, to justice, to the sweetest lesson he'll ever learn." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, and when the morning sun filtered through the curtains, I knew one thing for certain. My son thought he had stripped me of power. He thought calling me useless had ended my story. But what he didn't know was that I had only just begun writing his. The day my son came back to the house, he carried himself like a man who already owned it. He pulled into the driveway with his truck, the tires crunching on the gravel as though every sound announced victory. I watched from the living room window, my hands folded in front of me, my face calm though my stomach churned. His steps were brisk, confident, the heavy thud of boots against the porch echoing through the walls. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open like it was already his. "Dad," he said with a smirk, "I'm moving in." About time we did this the smart way. His eyes swept the room, the same room he had once filled with laughter as a boy. Now his gaze was cold, scanning not with nostalgia, but with possession. I said nothing at first. My silence made him uncomfortable. Though he wouldn't admit it, he dropped a duffel bag by the couch, shrugged off his jacket, and exhaled like a man settling into his throne. But this house was not his throne. Not yet. Not ever. I cleared my throat, slow and steady. "Before you make yourself too comfortable, there's something we need to go over." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're signing the house over, right? We already talked about this." I reached over to the table beside me and pulled out a neat stack of papers. My hand didn't shake as I placed them on the coffee table in front of him. The sound of the folder hitting the wood was sharp, final. "What's this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Your lease," I said simply. His laughter was harsh, incredulous. "Lease? What are you talking about, Dad? I told you to give me the house, not rent it to me." I leaned back in my chair, steady, my voice low but firm. "You wanted the house. You said I was useless, that I didn't need it anymore. You're right, I don't need the space. But I do need respect. And respect means you don't just take what you haven't earned. You want to live here? You'll pay rent. To me, as your landlord." For a moment his face was blank. Then the anger bloomed, red and hot. "Are you serious right now? You're going to treat your own son like a tenant?" I met his glare with calm resolve. "If I'm useless, then you don't need my house. But since you're here, you'll pay. Every month, on time." The silence between us was electric. He looked down at the papers, flipping through the neatly typed contract. Legal jargon filled the pages, and his smirk faltered when he saw the signature at the bottom. Mine, alongside the stamp of Harris's law office. Ironclad, binding, his voice cracked with fury. "You can't do this." "I already did," I replied quietly. For the first time, I saw it. The cracks in his confidence. The arrogance wavered, replaced by disbelief. He had expected a broken man, too weak to fight back. Instead, he found a father who had turned the tables. He slammed the folder shut, his fists shaking. "This is humiliating." "Good," I said, my tone cutting but calm. "Maybe humiliation will teach you what pride never did." He stormed toward the door, pacing, running his hands through his hair. "This isn't fair." I stood slowly, my knees aching but my back straight. "Fair? Fair was me working double shifts to keep this roof over your head. Fair was me going hungry so you could eat. Fair was me missing your games, your birthdays, your life, so you could have more than I ever did. Don't talk to me about fair." He froze, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, pressing down harder than any argument. Finally he muttered, "I can't believe this." "Believe it," I said, "because from now on you're not just my son. You're my tenant. And if you don't like it, the door works both ways." The silence that followed was deafening. He glared at me one last time, then stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the frame rattled. I sat back down slowly, my heart pounding but my face calm. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This silence was mine. It was victory. I picked up the lease papers, smoothed them out, and placed them carefully back in the folder. My hands no longer trembled. I was no longer a man stripped of dignity. I was no longer the father broken by a single word. I was the landlord. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. But the story didn't end there. The following days were filled with tension. My son returned, grumbling, pacing, trying to find loopholes. But every time he looked at the papers, the truth stared back at him. He had no claim, no power, no victory. The neighbors noticed his truck parked outside more often. Whispers spread about arguments, about papers, about money changing hands. The arrogance in his stride faded little by little, replaced by something else. Shame. And I went about my days quietly, watering the plants, fixing the creaky steps, making coffee in the mornings. For once, I didn't feel like a man waiting to be discarded. I felt like the master of my home again. My son thought he had humiliated me with a single word. But in the end, humiliation became his rent. And every month when he handed me that check, it wasn't just money. It was respect, forced but real, a reminder that he had underestimated the wrong man. When my son finally realized the lease was real, that the ink on the paper bound him tighter than any words he could throw at me, his arrogance began to crack. The first few days he puffed his chest and strutted through the house like a man in control, but the facade didn't last. Every morning I would sit at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee while he passed by with a scowl on his face. He tried not to look at me, tried not to acknowledge the quiet authority in the room, but every time his eyes flickered toward the folder on the shelf, the lease agreement, his jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened. The first rent day came like a thunderclap. He stood there, his hand trembling as he handed me the check. The shame in his eyes was undeniable. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the son taking. He was the tenant giving. And the silence in the room was heavier than any lecture I could have given. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply took the check, nodded, and placed it in an envelope. But inside me, something stirred. Not joy, not triumph, but a quiet, sharp satisfaction. He had called me useless. Now, every month, he had to prove I wasn't. It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. In small towns, nothing stays hidden for long. Mrs. Turner from across the street mentioned seeing my son's truck parked outside day and night. She asked innocently at the grocery store, "So, is your boy back living with you?" I smiled faintly, choosing my words carefully. Something like that. But the whispers grew. People noticed the tension when they passed by the porch, saw him storming out with clenched fists, heard the slam of doors. Children whispered to each other, mothers traded looks, fathers shook their heads. One afternoon, I overheard two men talking outside the diner. Can you believe it? John's son is renting from his old man. Imagine that. The house he tried to take, and now he's paying rent like any other tenant. The other chuckled. Serves him right. Kids always had too much pride. I walked past them without a word, but my heart pounded. Part of me felt a pang of sadness. No father wants his child to be the subject of ridicule. But another part of me, deeper and stronger, felt the justice in it. He had humiliated me with his words. Now the world humiliated him with its gaze. My son tried to put on a brave face, but shame clung to him like a second skin. At the hardware store, people looked at him differently. At the bar, men teased him with sly grins. "Hey, landlord's boy, you pay on time this month?" He laughed it off, but when he came home, his face was red with fury. He slammed doors, stomped through the hallways, muttered curses under his breath. I let him rage. Silence was my weapon, and I wielded it better than any shout. At night, I sometimes heard him in his room, pacing back and forth, talking to himself. The walls carried his frustration, the words spilling out in anger. Old man thinks he's smart. I'll show him. I'll show them all. But he never did. Because no matter how he schemed, no matter how he postured, the lease remained. The law was iron, and the pen had already cut deeper than his arrogance ever could. I won't lie, it hurt me too. Watching him struggle, watching him burn with humiliation wasn't the victory I had once imagined. This was my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had nursed through fevers, the boy I had loved more than my own life. There were nights I sat alone in the living room, staring at the old family photos, my chest heavy with sorrow. I hadn't wanted this war. I hadn't wanted revenge. All I had ever wanted was respect. But when he had called me useless, when he had demanded the house, he had left me no choice. I could forgive insults to myself, but I could not forgive the erasure of a lifetime of sacrifice. So I bore the pain. I bore the silence, and I let the weight of his own choices teach him the lesson I could never have spoken aloud. Weeks passed, and the rent became a ritual. He handed it over each month with bitterness etched into every line of his face. The arrogance drained, replaced by something else, resentment. One evening, as he shoved the envelope into my hand, he finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. "I'm your son, not your tenant." I looked at him calmly, my voice steady. "You're both. And until you learn the value of respect, that's all you'll be." His face twisted, his fists clenched, but he said nothing more. He stormed out into the night, his footsteps fading into the darkness. I sat there, the envelope heavy in my hand, my heart heavy in my chest. The line between father and landlord blurred, and though I had won, the victory tasted bittersweet. Humiliation followed him everywhere. Friends drifted away, unable to bear the weight of his shame. Family gatherings became tense, awkward affairs where no one dared speak of the arrangement, but everyone knew. And every time he passed me in the hallway, every time he avoided my eyes, I saw it. The slow crumble of pride, the cracks in his armor, the dawning realization that he had brought this on himself. For me, the lesson was clear. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to punish. All I needed was the truth, written in ink, bound by law, reinforced by silence. The sweetest revenge was not in breaking him down with anger, but in letting him break himself against the wall of his own arrogance. And as I sat on the porch one quiet evening, watching the sun set behind the trees, I whispered to myself, "Respect isn't inherited, it's earned, and one day he'll understand." The first month passed, and the rent was paid. Bitterly, reluctantly, but paid nonetheless. My son's pride took a blow, but he endured it with clenched fists and gritted teeth. He convinced himself it was temporary, that somehow he would regain control. But arrogance only lasts until reality sharpens its teeth. By the second month, the cracks widened. He had always lived above his means, chasing the illusion of success. A bigger truck, expensive clothes, nights out at bars flashing bills to impress friends. But now each check he wrote to me left his wallet thinner, his nights quieter, his friends fewer. He came home later, shoulders slumped, face pale with exhaustion. The bravado that once fueled him had begun to flicker. He avoided my gaze, muttered under his breath, and shut himself in his room. I heard him pacing sometimes, the muffled sound of his frustration hitting the walls, fists against plaster, curses swallowed in the dark. And I? I sat quietly in the living room, sipping my coffee, reading the newspaper, pretending not to hear. But inside me, the war raged. I was his father. Watching him stumble hurt more than I could admit. Every instinct told me to step in, to help, to fix it. But another voice, the voice forged from years of sacrifice and betrayal, told me this was his lesson to learn. If I saved him now, the cycle would never end. It started with late notices. I saw them tucked under his arm as he came through the door. Bright red stamps screaming past due. He tried to hide them, but a father notices. He shuffled past me, his jaw tight, heading straight to his room. One evening I heard him on the phone, his voice low but frantic. "I just need more time. I'll get the money, I swear. Just don't cut it off yet." His tone cracked, desperation bleeding through. The next morning he asked casually, "Dad, did you notice anything weird with the internet? It's been cutting in and out." I looked up from my paper. "Maybe because you haven't paid the bill." His face flushed, and he turned away, muttering something about calling the company. But I saw it, the panic, the shame. The world he had built on pride was collapsing, and the walls were closing in. I didn't want him to drown. As much as he had hurt me, as much as his words still echoed in my chest, he was still my son. So I helped in small ways, quiet ways. When the water heater broke, I fixed it myself instead of calling a repairman, saving him a bill he couldn't afford. When the electricity flickered, I paid part of the balance without his knowledge, ensuring the lights stayed on. I never told him. Let him believe the company had given him grace. It wasn't forgiveness. It was survival. A father's heart is complicated, capable of wrath and compassion at the same time. I couldn't let him fall completely, but I also couldn't let him escape the weight of his choices. The third rent day came, and this time his hand shook as he passed me the envelope. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He had lost weight. The arrogance melted from his frame. "This is killing me," he muttered. I placed the envelope down, calm as ever. "No, this is teaching you." His head snapped up, fury in his eyes. "You think you're better than me? You think this makes you powerful?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, this makes me respected. Something you forgot how to give." He slammed his fist on the table, the wood rattling beneath his anger. "I'm your son." "Yes," I said softly, "and I was your father. But you called me useless, remember?" The words silenced him. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The truth hung in the air, undeniable, crushing. He stormed out again, but this time his steps weren't strong. They dragged, heavy and broken. Days turned into weeks, and my son unraveled before my eyes. He avoided friends, avoided neighbors, avoided anyone who might ask questions he couldn't answer. The whispers grew louder. People spoke of his debts, his failures, his humiliation. At the diner, I overheard again. "Poor kid, renting from his old man, and still can't keep his head above water." Another voice laughed bitterly. "That's what happens when you bite the hand that fed you." I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling. I wanted to defend him, to shield him, but I said nothing. Some lessons are only learned in fire. At home, the silence between us grew thicker. He barely spoke, barely ate. Sometimes I heard him crying in his room, muffled sobs that tore at my chest. I wanted to knock, to comfort him, but I didn't. Because comfort without consequence is just indulgence. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn apart by conflict. I hated what this had become. I hated the distance, the silence, the pain etched into his face. But I hated more the arrogance that had brought us here. Was I cruel? Maybe. Was I justified? Absolutely. I thought of my wife, her voice still echoing. "Respect is the foundation of love, John. Without it, love crumbles." She had been right. My son's love had crumbled when respect had left. Now all that remained was the rubble, and perhaps from that rubble something new could be built. It was the fourth rent day that broke him. He stood before me, the envelope thin, his eyes hollow. He placed it on the table without meeting my gaze. "There's nothing left," he whispered. "I can't keep this up." I looked at him, really looked at him. The proud, arrogant boy who had once demanded my house was gone. In his place stood a man stripped bare by reality, humbled by consequence. "You don't have to keep this up," I said quietly. "All you have to do is remember who you are and who I am." He lifted his head slowly, eyes brimming with tears. For the first time in years, I saw vulnerability, raw, unguarded, human. "I thought you were weak," he admitted. His voice cracked. "I thought you had nothing left to give. But you're stronger than I ever knew." The silence that followed was heavy, but different now, not suffocating, cleansing. A silence that carried the weight of a lesson learned, the sting of pride broken, the seed of respect finally planted. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I only nodded, my heart aching but steady. "This was never about money," I said. "It was about respect. You called me useless. I needed you to see that I wasn't. Not then, not now, not ever." He lowered his head, shame flooding his face, And in that moment, I knew the battle was won. Not with anger, not with force, but with silence, patience, and the unshakable truth that dignity cannot be stolen unless you hand it away. The weeks dragged on, and with them my son's pride withered like leaves in late autumn. Each day he returned home, I noticed more cracks in his armor. His once carefree laughter was gone. His truck, once polished and gleaming, now carried the dust of neglect. His clothes hung looser on his frame, his shoes worn at the edges. I could see it in the way he moved. Shoulders hunched, steps heavy. The arrogance that had carried him into this house with demands had eroded, leaving behind only the frailty of a man who had overestimated himself. At dinner one evening, he barely touched his food. His fork scraped the plate, moving potatoes from one side to the other, but his appetite was gone. "I can't sleep," he muttered finally, his voice low, almost to himself. "The bills? They don't stop." I set my fork down quietly, watching him. He didn't look at me, but I could see the tremor in his hands. He was unraveling, and though part of me ached to reach out, another part knew this was the fire he had to walk through. Word spread further. The town was merciless in its curiosity. At the gas station, I overheard a couple of men talking near the pumps. Heard John's boy had to start renting from him. Can you imagine? Living under your old man's roof and paying him like a stranger. The other laughed. "Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, except this apple's rotten." The words stung, not for myself, but for him. Yet I said nothing. If he heard the whispers, they would cut deeper than anything I could say. And he did hear them. I saw it in the way his jaw clenched when he walked into town, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he came home faster than before. Pride, once his crown, had become his shackle. It wasn't just money he lost. It was people. His friends, the ones who had gathered around when he flashed cash at the bar, began to disappear. No more calls inviting him out, no more laughter spilling from late nights. When the money dried up, so did their loyalty. One night, I found him sitting on the porch alone, a half-empty beer bottle at his feet, his eyes distant. He didn't notice me at first. He muttered to himself, "Guess I was only worth the drinks I paid for." I stood in the doorway, unseen, my heart twisting. It was a lesson I couldn't teach him with words. Real respect can't be bought, and false friends vanish faster than smoke. The confrontation that came on the third rent day wasn't just about money. It was about everything. Years of resentment, unspoken truce, wounds that had festered. He slammed the envelope on the table, his voice breaking. "You don't understand what this is doing to me." I looked at him calmly. "It's showing you who you are." His fist curled. "No, it's breaking me. I thought you were supposed to help me, not to tear me down." My voice stayed steady. "I'm not tearing you down. Life is. I'm just letting you face it." He roared then, the sound raw, guttural. "You don't know what it's like to feel worthless." My own anger flickered, but I kept it caged. Don't I? Do you think I don't remember the night you called me useless in this very room? I know the weight of that word, and now, so do you. His chest heaved, his eyes wide. For a moment he looked like a cornered animal, torn between fight and surrender. But then he collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. His voice cracked, muffled. "I hate this. I hate me. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to remind him he was still my son. But I didn't. Not yet." He had to sit in the ashes of his pride before he could see the ember of who he truly was. That night, I sat in the quiet after he stormed off again, and I thought of his mother. I remembered the way she used to sit at this same table, her hand brushing mine after long days. I could almost hear her whisper, "Be patient with him, John. He's stubborn, but he's ours." I closed my eyes and whispered back into the silence, "I'm trying." I imagined what she might say if she were here now, that love sometimes means stepping back, letting the people you love fall, so they can rise again. It was the hardest kind of love, and it was the only way left. By the fourth rent day, his voice was barely a whisper. The envelope in his hand was thin, almost weightless. He laid it down like it burned him. "There's nothing left," he said, his words trembling. "I'm drowning, Dad. I thought I was strong. I thought I had control. But I have nothing. Nothing." I looked at him, really looked. The boy who had once demanded my house was gone. In his place sat a man hollowed by his own mistakes, stripped of illusions. "You don't need control," I said quietly. "You need respect. For others, for yourself, for the ones who carried you this far." His eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were weak." I shook my head slowly. "No, you thought sacrifice was weakness. You thought love was weakness. But love, son, is the strongest thing a man can give. Stronger than pride, stronger than greed, stronger than fear." He broke then. His sobs shook the room. Raw and unguarded, for the first time in years he let himself be small, let himself be vulnerable. And in that moment, I knew the lesson had landed. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I only nodded, steady. This was never about money. It was about respect. You called me useless. I needed you to see I wasn't. Not then. Not now. Not ever. His head dropped, shame spilling from him like water from a cracked jar. But beneath the shame, I saw something else. Recognition. The battle wasn't about ownership. It was about dignity. And dignity had been restored. The house was silent that evening, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of home. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of two men carrying too much between them. The table was set simply: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a loaf of bread. Food had always been a way my wife brought us together, but tonight, even the smell of warm bread couldn't fill the void. My son sat across from me, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on his plate. He pushed the food around with his fork, but didn't take a bite. The man who had once barged into this house with arrogance now looked small, almost fragile. Finally he spoke, his voice low, strained. "Dad, I can't do this anymore." I set my fork down quietly, waiting. He swallowed hard. "The rent, the bills, everything. It's crushing me. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could outsmart it. But I can't. I've failed." His voice cracked on the last word. I studied him carefully. His jaw trembled, his eyes glistened. For the first time, I saw not the arrogant man who had demanded my house, but the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy who clung to me when thunder frightened him at night. "You haven't failed," I said softly. "You've learned." He looked up sharply, his face twisted with shame. "Learned what? That I'm weak? That I can't even stand on my own without you holding me up? Everyone in town knows, Dad. They laugh at me. They whisper behind my back. I'm humiliated." His words hung in the air, thick with pain. I leaned forward, my hands clasped together. "Do you think I don't know what humiliation feels like? Do you think I don't remember the night you called me useless in my own living room?" He flinched, his face paling. "Those words cut deeper than you will ever understand," I continued. But I didn't fight back with shouting or anger. I fought back with silence, with resolve, because I needed you to see. I'm not useless. I have never been useless. The room was heavy, but I pressed on. My voice was calm, steady, but every word carried the weight of years. Do you know how many nights I worked double shifts at the factory? How many mornings I came home with my hands bleeding from steel and heat? Do you know how many times I went hungry so you could eat? How many Christmases I spent at work, not because I wanted to, but because the mortgage had to be paid? He sat frozen, his fork clattering to the plate. His lips parted, but no sound came. I leaned back, my eyes drifting to the old photos on the wall. Your mother and I built this house from the ground up, not just with money, but with sacrifice. Every wall, every floorboard, every nail holds a piece of our lives. When she passed, this house became the last piece of her I had left, and you stood there, in the very room she once filled with laughter, and told me I was useless. My voice cracked then, not with weakness, but with the weight of truth. Do you know what that felt like? To give everything, my youth, my strength, my love, and be told I had nothing left to give? Tears welled in his eyes. His lips trembled. Dad, I didn't mean it. I was angry. I was stupid. I... He choked on the words, pressing his hands to his face. I was wrong. The silence stretched. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. For years I had waited for this moment. Not an apology, not repayment, but acknowledgement. Slowly I spoke again. This was never about the house. It was never about money. It was about respect. A father isn't useless because he grows old. He isn't useless because his hair turns gray or his hands grow weak. A father carries the weight of his family, even when no one notices, and all I wanted was for you to see that. The tears spilled freely down his cheeks now. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. I see it now. God, I see it. I was blind, arrogant. I thought I was strong, but I was nothing without you. I see it, Dad. I see you. For the first time in months, maybe years, my chest loosened. The bitterness that had poisoned me began to lift. Not completely, but enough. I reached across the table, my hand resting on his trembling one. You don't have to see me as a landlord. You just have to see me as your father. That's all I ever wanted. He squeezed my hand, his sobs racking his frame. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. And in that moment, the truth was laid bare. The arrogance had shattered, the pride had crumbled, and in its place was the raw, undeniable bond of father and son. The meal grew cold on the table, but neither of us cared. We sat there for hours, speaking not of money or contracts, but of memories. I told him stories he had forgotten, of the nights I sang him to sleep, of the mornings I carried him to school when his legs were too tired, of the sacrifices he never knew I made. And he listened, really listened. The lesson had been cruel, but necessary. The humiliation had been bitter, but cleansing. And as the night stretched on, the silence between us finally softened, no longer heavy with resentment, but with understanding. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. For the first time in a long time, he felt humbled. And in the fragile quiet of that night, respect, long lost, long buried, began to grow again. The tears on his cheeks did not stop quickly. They came like a storm long suppressed, and as I sat across from him, I realized just how long my son had carried his own pride as a shield. Brittle, fragile, and doomed to break. Between his sobs, he whispered, I thought I was protecting myself by taking control. I thought if I had the house, if I had everything, I wouldn't have to feel weak. But all I did was make myself smaller. I let him speak. For once, he was not talking at me, but to me. I was afraid, he admitted, afraid of becoming like you, working yourself to the bone, giving everything, ending up alone. I thought if I was ruthless, I'd never be powerless. But the truth is, I'm more powerless than I've ever been. His words cut me differently, not like a wound, but like a mirror. For years I had feared the same thing, that my sacrifices, my endless labor, had left me old and alone. And maybe, in some twisted way, he had inherited that fear, twisting it into arrogance. I took a deep breath and told him something I had never said aloud. Son, do you know why I worked those long shifts? Why I broke my back day after day in that factory? It wasn't because I loved the pain. It wasn't because I loved the house. It was because I loved you. Because I wanted you to never know what it felt like to go hungry, to wear shoes with holes, to wonder if there'd be heat in the winter. I paused, my throat tight. Yes, it left me tired. Yes, it aged me before my time. But don't mistake sacrifice for weakness. Don't mistake love for uselessness. His hands covered his face, and his voice cracked. I didn't see it. God, I didn't see it. I thought you were clinging to the past. I thought you had nothing left. But you had everything. You had me. And I was too blind to realize it. I felt the weight of decades pressing down, but I pressed on, needing him to hear every word. Your mother used to tell me, one day he'll understand. I didn't believe her. I thought maybe I would die before that day came. But sitting here, hearing you now, Maybe she was right. He looked up at the mention of his mother, tears brimming in his eyes again. I remember her laugh, he whispered, how she used to hum in the kitchen. I remember the way she'd put her hand on your shoulder when you were exhausted. She believed in you. He broke off, shaking his head. I betrayed both of you. No, I said firmly. You lost your way. That's different. Betrayal is final. But finding your way back, that's what makes a man. The silence that followed was not the heavy silence of resentment. It was the silence of healing, the kind where words give way to something deeper. We sat for a long time, and then I told him stories he had forgotten, stories buried in the dust of years, how I had once carried him 5 miles in the rain when the car broke down, just so he wouldn't miss school, how I had pawned my father's watch, the only heirloom I had, to pay for his first college textbooks, how I had stayed up nights, not sleeping, just listening for his breath when he was sick with pneumonia as a child, terrified I might lose him. Each story broke him a little more, not into weakness, but into truth. His tears flowed freely, his pride dissolving in the tide of memory. Finally he whispered, all those years, and I thought you were just a tired, bitter old man. I was wrong. You were strong, stronger than I'll ever be. I reached across the table again, my hand steady on his. You'll be strong in your own way, but strength without humility destroys. Respect builds it. That's the lesson I needed you to learn. He nodded, silent, but the weight of his grip told me he understood. The food on the table had gone cold, the bread hardening, the chicken untouched. But neither of us cared. For the first time in years, the distance between us closed. Not completely. Wounds don't vanish in a night, but enough. Enough for me to believe that perhaps the house had done what it was meant to do. Hold not just our memories, but our lessons. As the night wore on, he finally said the words I had waited for, words I never thought I'd hear. Dad, you're not useless. You never were. You're the reason I'm still standing at all. And with that, the silence broke. Not with laughter, not with noise, but with understanding. The days that followed our dinner were unlike any we had shared in years. The air in the house shifted, lighter, softer. The tension that once clung to every corner began to loosen, replaced by something fragile but real, acknowledgement. My son rose earlier in the mornings, his steps slower, more thoughtful. He no longer slammed doors or avoided my eyes. Instead, he lingered in the kitchen, pouring his coffee beside me, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes venturing a hesitant word. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One morning, as the sun poured gold through the curtains, he looked at me and said, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I folded my papers slowly, meeting his gaze. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, it's about choosing, and I choose to see more than your mistakes. He swallowed hard, nodding, his jaw tight, but I saw the relief flicker in his eyes, the way shame gave way to gratitude. The rent still came, but the ritual was different now. He no longer tossed the envelope at me with bitterness. He placed it gently on the table, his eyes steady, almost respectful. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about recognition. Every payment was an acknowledgement that dignity mattered, that words carried weight, that respect had a price. But more than that, he began to change in ways I hadn't expected. He stopped going out every night. He cut back on the showy expenses that had once drained him. He started helping with the repairs around the house, fixing a loose railing, repainting the porch, mowing the lawn without being asked. And with every small act, I saw glimpses of the boy I had raised, the man he could still become. At night, I would sit in my recliner, the same one I had clutched the night he called me useless, and think about the journey we had taken. I had not set out to punish him. I had set out to teach him, to remind him that age is not weakness, that sacrifice is not futility. And in the silence, I realized something else. I, too, had learned. I had learned that dignity doesn't come from others' approval, but from refusing to let go of your own worth. That sometimes love has to be fierce, even painful, to be real. Word traveled fast in town, as it always did, but the whispers shifted. Where once they mocked my son, now they began to admire the change. Have you noticed? He's different now, Mrs. Turner said to me at the market. Quieter, more respectful. I smiled faintly. He's learning. And in their eyes I saw something else. Respect not just for him, but for me. For standing my ground, for teaching without shouting, for proving that old age is not uselessness, but wisdom earned through fire. One evening my son sat with me on the porch. The crickets sang in the yard, and the air smelled of cut grass. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and said, "Dad, I used to think power came from control, from having the deed, from taking what I thought I deserved. But now I know power isn't about control. It's about respect. And I lost everything the moment I lost respect for you." I nodded, my chest heavy but proud. Respect is the foundation, son. Without it, family crumbles. With it, even broken things can be rebuilt. He turned to me then, his eyes shining with sincerity I hadn't seen in years. I can't undo what I said. I can't erase what I did. But I promise you, I'll never call you useless again. You're the strongest man I know. The words settled into me like balm on an old wound. The scar would remain, but the pain had finally eased. Life did not suddenly become perfect. We still had disagreements, moments of silence, days where pride threatened to rise again. But the foundation had shifted. Respect had returned, fragile but real. And as I sat in my house, watching the sun dip low, I realized the sweetest revenge had never been about money or contracts. It had been about teaching the lesson no words could carry, that dignity cannot be stolen, only surrendered. And I had not surrendered. To anyone who has ever been called useless, who has ever been discarded or underestimated, remember this. Age is not uselessness. Sacrifice is not weakness. And respect, once demanded and earned, cannot be denied. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not shouting, not fighting, not even winning. It is standing tall in silence, letting your strength speak for itself, and watching as those who doubted you finally see the truth. And for me, the truth was simple. I was never useless. I was a father, and that has always been enough. At 70, I had expected quiet mornings, a warm cup of coffee, and maybe, if I was lucky, the occasional visit from my son without tension hanging between us. Instead, on my birthday, he and his siblings turned love into ledger lines. They stared across the dinner table, not with affection, but with calculation, and they demanded what they thought they were owed. My house, my savings, the bones of everything I had built. I refused them that night, and that refusal should have ended the matter. But greed never sleeps. It hunts, it circles, and sometimes it borrows your own child's face. Days later, a thick envelope arrived, stamped with the weight of consequence. I slid it open carefully, thinking it might be another cold birthday greeting from a distant acquaintance. Instead, I found a nightmare written in legalese, a notice of collection. My house listed as collateral for a loan I had never signed. Attached was a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of my home, my sanctuary, to my son. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine. It was shaky, misshapen, but it was also a forgery. My stomach tightened. I had sacrificed decades to preserve this roof, this plot of earth, and now my own blood had tried to pawn it off like a poker chip. I called Harris, my lawyer, and my only true ally. He arrived that afternoon, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He spread the papers on the table and examined them with surgical precision. "This is a bad forgery," he said, tapping the crude stamp. "But lenders like this don't care. They push fast, hoping fear will make you fold." "Did he do this?" I asked quietly, though I already knew. Harris didn't answer. He didn't have to. My son came home late that night. He froze when he saw Harris and me waiting. The forged deed spread across the kitchen table like evidence in a trial. He opened his mouth, closed it, then sat heavily in a chair. "I didn't mean," he began. "Didn't mean to what?" I asked. Didn't mean to sell my house? Didn't mean to gamble your life into a pit? He dropped his gaze. I just needed a bridge loan. They told me it was just paperwork. They said it wouldn't even be used if I paid on time. Harris slid the deed toward him. This isn't paperwork. This is fraud, and it nearly cost your father his home. My son rubbed his face, his shoulders slumping. I was drowning, Dad. I know, I said coldly. But when a drowning man panics, he drags others down with him, and you chose to drag me. For a long time, silence hung heavy in the kitchen, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hall. I could have thrown him out then. Maybe I should have. But blood is a chain, even when it cuts. We'll fight this, I said finally. For the house, not for you. For the house. He flinched at that, but didn't argue. The next day, Harris filed an affidavit of forgery and secured the title at the county recorder's office. He drafted a blistering letter to the lender, accusing them of predatory fraud, and copied the state attorney general for good measure. By sunset, their bravado began to crack, but predators don't always retreat quietly. On the third evening, a black SUV pulled into the drive. A man stepped out, tall, polished, with a grin too wide for honesty. He carried no briefcase, only charm sharpened into a weapon. Mr. John? He said smoothly, extending a hand. Name's Langley, Senior Collections Advisor. I think we can resolve this, man to man. I didn't take his hand. I didn't move from the porch. We already resolved it, with the law. You have no claim here. He chuckled like we were sharing a joke. Lawyers complicate things. I'm here to keep it simple. Work with me, and this all goes away. Harris stepped out from the hallway, holding a folder. He's right about one thing, he said to Langley. This will go away, but only after we file fraud charges against your firm. He handed Langley the notice we had prepared. Consider this your first and final warning. Langley's smile faltered. He looked at me, then at my son, who hovered shamefaced behind the door. He seemed to do the math. The old man wasn't as weak as he looked, and he wasn't alone. Without another word, he retreated to his SUV and disappeared into the night. When the taillights faded, my son whispered, You saved me. No, I said firmly. I saved the house. Saving you is something you'll have to do yourself. That night, I laid out new terms. Not legal, not financial, ethical rent. You'll keep paying rent just like before, I told him. But each month, the payment will cover two debts, what you owe in dollars and what you owe in dignity. You'll join a recovery group. You'll show proof. You'll build a budget and stick to it. For every month you succeed, rent drops a little. Fail once, it resets. Do you understand? He stared at the paper, then at me. You're making me earn my way back? Yes, I said. Respect isn't inherited. It's renewed, month to month. He signed. In the weeks that followed, he made small but real changes. He sold the gadgets he didn't need, canceled the memberships he never used, and found a recovery group in the church basement on Maple Street. He came home with a little chip, sky blue, proof that he had made it through a week without gambling. Each Sunday, he brought receipts and a handwritten budget. We sat together at the kitchen table, deciding what was a want and what was a need. Sometimes he stumbled, sometimes he argued, but the ledger began to balance, not just in his wallet, but in his character. For the first time in years, I allowed myself a fragile hope. Maybe he could change, maybe the house could heal. But peace, I had learned, is only the pause between storms. One evening I returned from the hardware store to find the mailbox pried open, its hinge bent. Inside was a single envelope, neatly centered with my name written in deliberate script. No stamp, no return address. I opened it under the kitchen light. 2 photographs slipped out. In the first, my son sat at a bar with a stranger, thin, hungry-looking, with eyes that promised nothing good. In the second, the 2 of them shook hands in a parking lot beside a car with its trunk slightly ajar. Inside, stacked white boxes glinted under the streetlight. No caption, no explanation, Just images waiting to become an accusation. My son's face drained of color. Dad, it's not what it looks like. He offered me a scheme. Stolen phones, quick cash. I said no. I left. I swear, I studied him. Father's instinct weighing his every word. He wasn't lying. Then someone wants you to look guilty, I said, and they want me to see it. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Hit that like button so more people can find it. Click subscribe and turn on the bell, because every week we bring you powerful stories of family, betrayal, and redemption. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment when someone underestimated you or treated you as if you were useless? I'd love to read your stories, every single one. And if you think someone you know needs to hear this, share this video with them. Because sometimes a story can be the reminder we all need. Respect is never given freely. It's earned, it's defended, and it's remembered. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.